All right, Lon is back
Okay.
with us.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Then,
Very good. Yeah, well,
and
like
we
I
just
was
have to do
saying, I
something
mean,
here,
I'm,
folks. Bear with us. It's been a couple weeks, and
I just wanted to, I wanted to thank everybody for, for sticking with me and sticking with the family. And, like I said before, wanted to stay in the saddle, keep riding, and didn't want to have too much delay. And it feels good to be back on the show.
well, we're glad to have you back, Lon. And you and I talk every day.
Hmm.
Sometimes, maybe for 3 or 4 or 5 hours a day, if you break up all the little messages we send back and forth.
Yeah.
So, we always stay in touch, and it was just nice to see so many people coming out for you. It meant a lot to me. I know it meant a lot for you and
Oh, yeah.
Vanessa and the family, and here we are tonight,
Yeah. Yeah.
kicking it off.
Yeah, I was really, I was overwhelmed actually. I was overwhelmed by the expressive gratitude and all the support and everything, love and everything I got from everybody. So it made me feel good. So I just want to thank everyone for that, and you know, we're gonna keep on going.
And speaking of keep on going, we have a lot to talk about tonight. Lon, why don't you kick it off with some stories you've been compiling, and we can go ahead and give it a banter or two.
Well, I think the first one I'll talk about is something that came up with last week or week before when J.C. Johnson and our friend J.C. Johnson from Crypto Four Corners, he gave me a call in reference to the mysterious Oklahoma octopus. Now, this legend's been going around for a long time. Supposedly this cryptid is a freshwater cephalopod-like creature. Uh, and the story has that it's generally said to inhabit at least two lakes in Oklahoma. That's Lake Thunderbird and Lake Tenkiller. Though there have been mentions of other places as well. So supposedly it attacks and kills unsuspecting swimmers. And according to the legend, this freshwater monster measures the size of a horse and resembles a marine octopus with long tentacles and leathery red-brown skin. Now skeptics are questioning whether an octopus, which is an ocean creature, can survive in freshwater lakes, even though jellyfish and sharks have been known to live in freshwater. So it's easy to believe that such a creature would be a fearsome predator. The giant Pacific octopus, for example, has tentacles that each boast the strength of a 200-pound man and a powerful beak that can kill its prey.
That's a strong octopus.
Oh yeah. So, but the bottom line is, if there is one, all monster-sized cephalopods were at one time a small juvenile cephalopod. So, this very well may not be a rumor or a legend, because recently it came to JC's attention that on April the 6th, 2011, in the Canadian River, which is near Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, a small cephalopod was caught. And now they had a photo of it, and it's about on about 5 or 6 inch octopus that came out of the river. Now the photo came way by one of JC's associates, Stephen Freeman, who was the first to investigate the circumstances of the photo. Now he's also an Oklahoma resident and is currently following up on the sightings. He's presently active in the process of procuring a cephalopod for examination. Now, the man in the photo reported seeing 4 to 5 more along the shore, but also reported that one was caught, and it was caught like 30 foot from shore. So, it wasn't reported to the wildlife officials, from what I understand. Now, a lady actually reported catching one at Lake Thunderbird on October 1st of this year.
Did it try to eat her?
No, and at a
Then what's
depth
she
of
bitching about?
30 foot using a minnow for bait. But apparently she said her telephone was dead, so she couldn't take any pictures. So I don't know if she kept the thing or not. Now, Crypto Four Corner investigator Jack Carey, who lives in the Denver area, added that he grew up in the Oklahoma City area, and there were a lot of reports of water skiers and swimmers being pulled underwater, and some never being seen again. Also, there had been talk of people who survived attacks while swimming, swearing that tentacles were wrapped around them, pulling them to deeper water.
No, I would complain about that. That's something that is complaint worthy.
So, I mean, now there is an established story, you know, as established stories go, that three teenagers by the name of Tyler Schumann, Ruthie Simple, and Bruce Delroy were reported to have drowned, pulled down by the creature. Now, the reports also apparently state that two other teenagers with them had blister-like wounds and scabs, like the marks caused by a octopus suckers. So, these tales go back to the Native Americans from the area of the Caddo Empire, who told legends of large creatures that looked somewhat like a leech and ate men alive, even though the lakes were man-made in the mid-20th century. The stories go on to say that the ponds were linked underground, so the tentacle creature would lurk just beneath the surface, waiting for prey to come for a drink, and that it would drag them to their deaths. When the lakes were made, the creatures moved in, but still lurked in the old springs that leak into the lake bottom. So that information needs to be investigated. So Crypto Four Corners is going to be planning a spring expedition in order to capture one of these cephalopods. And at the same time, Steve Freeman, he's in the area trying to procure one. Now, in the meantime, JC is continuing to conduct his research in the upper Midwest along the Canadian border. And frankly, what he is doing is looking into the Dogman sightings up there. And what information I got from him, he has some pretty good evidence. So he tells me that, of course, the owl fans monsters will have the exclusive access to any information and evidence that's established. So I'm waiting to get that from him, and I'll probably be hearing something soon from him.
Well, if it's in the water, I don't mess around with it. You know me, I don't go near the water.
I'm the same way. I am not, I am not someone gonna be diving in the water after something. Not that I don't like the water. It's just that, it's just one of those things. That's always something that's always bugged me. I used to go, uh, I used to go into the freshwater lakes when I lived up in Pennsylvania as a kid, and you knew some of the size of the fish that were in that thing, like big muskies and such. And those things had teeth. They used to scare the hell out of me. So,
And rightfully so. They should. They're giant fish with teeth that could eat your face off. I don't mess around with them, man. I don't go in the water. I'm not much of a fisherman because I'm afraid of what I'm going to hook. I like the woods. That's about it. And I don't do beaches either. Not a big fan of the beach, but that's a whole nother story for another time. There was Greenpeace involved and some media and trying to roll me back into the water. It wasn't a good time. It concluded with James Baker yelling, "That's not his blowhole," and that was it.
oh, jeez. So, other than that story, there's not a whole lot that I had. I did, I did write some things up about these possible bioengineering of Bigfoot and such that that may have been going on in the Edgewood Arsenal facility. This was an investigation I actually started looking into after my my Sykesville Monster story was put on TV, I had a lot of people contacting me, and I started getting information concerning uh, an area, well, a facility near me, near in Sykesville, that was people used to refer to as the Monkey House. Now, I knew of the building, but I never knew what the building is for, other than that I had heard it was a laundry where inmates were kept, to do the laundry for the local hospital. And apparently at the time of the Sykesville Monster flap back in the early 70s, one of the witnesses who had made a statement the to the Baltimore Afro Americans, who actually, which is the paper that actually did the early investigation of the case, stated that somebody needed to look into the Monkey House. So, you know, but none of the witnesses, and after I had my encounter, and none of the witnesses I talked starting in 1981 ever mentioned this place. Now, I made a few inquiries, uh, in reference to the Monkey House, and according to one source, who was an original witness, may have been referring to this two-story building that once stood near the present-day police and correctional training facility on Slack Road. Now, that's the building I had thought it was. It had a lot of security around it. It had chain link fence. It had razor wire and stuff above it. The building was officially designated as the laundry facility used by the state hospital. Now, I do recall the security, and I was told at the time that correctional inmates were kept there to launder clothes, and that they actually stayed at the facility. Many locals questioned that explanation. It just didn't seem right. And the moniker Monkey House may have been used for most part by the people who worked at Springfield, which Springfield was actually a state hospital, and this, uh, it was for people that had mental disabilities, and they also kept criminally insane there as well. So now that building was eventually razed and replaced by a residential community. So I had an investigator contact me who was ex-US Air Force and had worked at a government facility north of Baltimore in Harford County in the early 80s, which was in the Edgewood Arsenal. And he was part of a group of ex-military who were employed to perform general work around the facility. At one particular hot and humid day, he and a crew were working outside of a specific building at this government facility. Now, they had been told that they could walk inside the building if they needed a quick break and a drink of water. Now, he states that he entered the building looking for the water fountain, couldn't locate one. So he walked deeper into the building and soon witnessed a large, heavy, reinforced door that just seemed out of place. The door had been damaged as if it were ran by something of significant size and power. By this time, he was approached by a woman in uniform who informed him that he was in a classified area and he must leave immediately. He explained that he was just looking for the water fountain. A security officer was now on the scene, and he directed the witness to the water fountain. As they were heading toward the building exit, the witness inquired about the damaged door, and the security officer only mentioned that the door was damaged by something confined behind it. Now, after several years of scrutiny and questions, the investigator believes that this building was used for research and contained unknown bipedal beings that had somehow escaped between 1979 and 1984. He had received information that 20 to 34 individuals of both sexes had been in the building at some period. He also mentioned that during this period of time that there had been many Bigfoot sightings at Rock State Park and Gunpowder Falls State Park, which are located near the government facility. Now, I've been aware of the Bigfoot sightings in those locations for over the years, but I don't know if these sightings are related to these aforementioned escapes. Of course, this information is completely anecdotal and based on what and witnesses' account. So, let's be hypothetical for a second. Is it possible that the being I witnessed near Sykesville, Maryland in 1981 was an escaped experiment? Because this facility in Sykesville was nearby, the one that people referred to as the Monkey House. Was there another incident or series of incidents at other facilities in Maryland during the same time period? So, since the time I posted it, I've talked to several people who were aware of or part of the various government biological experiments. One facility that continued to come up in conversations was the Edgewood Arsenal in Harford County, Maryland, which is the same facility mentioned by this investigator. Now, there was a 1994 documentary titled Bad Trip to Edgewood, which you can find on YouTube. And it starts by showing clips of animals being cruelly tested in the Edgewood laboratory, with voice overstating that animals were always tested before humans. Now, the clips were highly disturbing, but then the documentary states that such experiments were not confined to animals. The medical research volunteer program was conducted at the facility in 1948 through 1975. The aim of the experiments was to analyze the impact of chemical warfare agents on military personnel to test the likes of vaccines, pharmaceuticals, and protective clothing. It is now known that 7,000 soldiers and 1,000 civilians were used as guinea pigs, half of which were tested with so-called psychochemicals and mind-altering drugs. The medical volunteers were never told that what the chemicals were, and when they asked what the drugs were, they were told not to ask questions. But what is the actual stunt taking place at Edgewood and these other facilities throughout the country? This location, Edgewood, was later designated as the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute for Chemical Defense. It is also, it's also near that Aberdeen Proving Ground area. Now, I guess a lot of people, a lot of people are aware after the fall of the Soviet Union that that Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin had ordered a creation of altered hominid warriors by crossing humans with apes, according to the secret documents uncovered in 2005. Now, in the mid-1920s, Russia's top animal breeding scientist, Ivanov, was ordered to turn his skills from horse and animal work to the quest of a super warrior. Now, according to the Moscow newspapers, Stalin told the scientists, "I want a new invincible human being insensitive to pain, resistant and indifferent about the quality of food they eat." The project failed, of course, because the technology just wasn't available. But is it possible that the United States government embarked on a project remotely paralleling the Soviets?
It's
I
possible.
I guess it's possible. There have been a lot of hairy hominid sightings in Harford and Baltimore counties, and here in Maryland, north into Pennsylvania,
And
west
that's
of
just spring break.
Susquehanna River over the past 35 years. Now, unlike my sighting near Sykesville, most of the descriptions of were of human-like faces. And in fact, many of the East Coast hairy hominids share that distinction, as opposed to the descriptions of ape-like features further west. Now, this all begs for another familiar question: why haven't any of these beings ever been caught or found dead? Now, if bioengineering is part of the development of these beings, who is to say that reverse engineering or reverse engineered extraterrestrial technology has never been incorporated in the formulation of this or any other life form? Could certain technology give these beings the ability to cloak or be multiverse travelers? Who's to say that other unknown beings and or bipedal cryptids can't possess the same traits? This may be a big drop in the rabbit hole, but I never discount man's willingness to venture closer to the creator. So, how far will they go? We don't know.
No, we don't. And I just posted in the chat room, if we can clone sheep, who the heck knows what we can really do? And I think that's a fair point. But we go back to this storyline, and this is not the first time I've heard the monkey house brought up along your, in the area near your encounter. And this is the first time I'm hearing about some of the internal workings of some of these other facilities with this giant metal door that looks like it's been attacked and bulged and prone. So I don't know. And they raised the building now, so there's no way to go back and really find out.
No.
But now all we have to do is start taking reports from other folks that were in these buildings around those times and see if more people can come forward with information on this. I guess I'm really more intrigued that, the person makes claims of, what did they say, 20 to 30 individuals of both sexes?
20 to 34 individuals of both sexes.
20 to 34.
Where he got these numbers at, he didn't say.
I
will say though that he was an investigator when he was in the service.
Okay.
When he was still active in the service, and when he retired, he became a PI, a private investigator.
Mm-hmm.
So that was his job. Now I think he may have retired altogether recently, but when he saw my experience on television when it was on Monsters and Mysteries in America, he called me, and that's when he told me about this monkey house thing, and it's something I had heard of later. Mm-hmm. Though when I had the encounter and started investigating with other witnesses, I never heard of it before. But he went back and found the reference by one of the original witnesses to the story in the Baltimore Afro-American newspaper who did the initial investigation. So then, so now, he thought it was curious with this thing, at Edgewood, and now that information that he had, that specific information that he had, I have no idea where he got it, and that's why I have been asking and been looking around for people that may possibly know something. I have talked to a few, and around, I don't know if you're familiar with the Baltimore, Washington area. Well, it's government facilities everywhere,
mm-hmm.
and the military has a lot of research facilities, and I would say that at least 30% of the population in this area works somewhere for the government, either the state or federal government.
Well, you're so close to Washington, and
I mean, there's just a lot of places, and even down into Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
So the United States government does have a lot. They have a lot going on, and there's a lot going on that people don't know about, of course. I had found out that there was a missile silo less than a mile away from me not long ago, and it was actually a retired missile silo. I never even knew it was there.
We got to watch out for these missiles right now. They're
Yeah,
causing...
so it's you know, so there is a lot of stuff in the area, and
Mm-hmm.
but there are a lot of people that work at these facilities, and of course, people are. I don't know what kind of non-disclosure agreements they have when they retire, and uh, how long before they can discuss anything. You do get a few people that will come forward occasionally, uh, but it's not. For the amount of people that are out there, it's really not easy to get them to tell you anything.
Well, no one wants to
Uh,
lose their pension in this economy.
Absolutely. And I can't blame them. But some of the information that bits and pieces I have gotten are fairly interesting.
It is
And
interesting stuff.
yeah, so we'll see. Maybe we'll get something else.
Well, you think about things like Stalin's ape men, and who the
Yeah,
heck knows what the hell the Nazis were into, and it, where we're at with technology now, and biotechnology, and genetic engineering, and the mapping of the genome, and those sorts of projects that are going on out there in research. What can we do today that we couldn't do 50 years ago, 60 years
yeah,
ago? And
yeah.
that bothers me a little bit. So I don't know. And I guess we're just gonna have to chop this one up to wait and see if we hear anything else.
Well, and we've got the perfect guest tonight for that because uh, Nick Redfern has been investigating this weird stuff, these conspiracies, in with cryptids and government, NASA, UFOs, ufology for a long time now. I've been writing about it. So this may be something that he can cast, get some answers to as well.
Well, it'll be interesting to get his take on this.
Yeah, yeah, it will be. So I guess that maybe we should take a break, bring Nick on here, and go into the next segment.
Yeah, I guess we'll do that. I guess I don't have anything else to talk about myself either. A couple Bigfoot reports came in, Lon, the last
I
couple
saw that.
days that we're
Did
going to
see that.
investigate.
Yes, I just saw that today.
Tom Ference is on the case, so we'll get some information shortly on that. This missile, quote unquote, in California's got everybody's panties in a twist.
I think that what was a sub-launch missile
I think
that
so.
yeah, it was like a blue ball of light, scared the hell out of a bunch of people in Southern California.
Well, you think that was the point? It is an election year coming
Ah,
up.
maybe.
We need to be stronger on national defense. Fire a missile.
And another thing, I talking about the Butch mentioned tonight about the Pennsylvania Dogman investigation. That we're going to have some dates coming up for the next round of that. That
Excellent.
the first investigation wasn't a whole lot, but there was some strange. I don't know. It seemed like the locations were so quiet for some reason. Um, he was explaining it to me. It sounded really eerie. It's got my interest up. I may have to go up there and check that out myself.
We'll get you on
Uh,
out there, Lon.
yeah, I might have to go up there myself and look around. But we'll see.
All right. Well, let's take our break. We got a little Ozzy Osbourne for the intermission, and then we're going to bring on Nick Redfern to talk about Men in Black, Bloodlines of the Gods, and whatever else Lon pulls out of the hat. So stay tuned, folk. Time for you to go and have a smoke, get a cup of water, maybe a cup of coffee, whatever you need to hang with us. We'll be right back right after this. And welcome back, folks. Arcane Radio. Sean, the Fork Chop Forker, here with Lon Strickler and our guest tonight, Mr. Nick Redfern. And, folks, if you've been a listener of Arcane Radio or you have any interest in the paranormal, then you already know who Nick Redfern is. And, he's been on our show a couple times. He's been with us on the old program Beyond the Edge Radio. And you can read Nick's articles on jimherald.com. And just about anywhere else that cryptozoology or UFOlogy is abundant. And Nick, thanks for joining us tonight here on Arcane Radio.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
It's our pleasure as always. Lon, this is where you
Yeah,
kick it in the gear, big guy.
yeah, Nick, you had mentioned to me that you had just or you're working on this the Chupacabra's book. What is that all about?
Well, actually, I'm not so much working on it. It actually came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago,
Okay.
thereabouts. And it's called Chupacabra Road Trip. And it's about, it's like a road trip style diary type book on all the expeditions I've been on looking for the Chupacabra. And that sort of goes back to the original Puerto Rican reports. I've been to Puerto Rico many times looking for the Chupacabra, the first time in 2004 and the most recent last year. And so that the part of the book, or sort of about 2/3 of the book, is devoted to all the Puerto Rican expeditions, and then the other third of the book, or thereabouts, is on the so-called Texas and American Chupacabra, and then through to Mexico, South America, places like that. So it's sort of written in the sort of spirit of a road trip, you know, hitting the road and looking for the Chupacabra.
So what have you come up with? What is the actual origin of this cryptid?
Well, it gets kind of confusing because I guess the term Chupacabra has become so iconic that any kind of weird-looking animal, people say, "Oh, it's the Chupacabra," you know. But of course, you know, we have the sort of more modern era Chupacabras in the US, which are these sort of hairless coyote dogs. But the original Chupacabra that surfaced in Puerto Rico in 1995 is described as a very sort of different-looking creature. For people who don't know, Chupacabra is a Spanish term meaning goat sucker, and it takes its name from the fact that when the wave of sightings began in Puerto Rico, excuse me, in 1995, a lot of the animals that were attacked were farm animals, and particularly goats, and there were a lot of rumors about the animals being drained of blood. Now, 1995, you know, I was aware of the Chupacabra phenomenon through sort of magazines and newsletters. You know, there wasn't much of an internet back then at all, just, you know, very basic. So we were reliant on, you know, just waiting for magazine stories and newsletters to come out on the latest news. But as I said, the first time I went to Puerto Rico was in 2004, and I think it's like any aspect of cryptozoology. The best way to get answers is to go and look for these things, whether it's Bigfoot-like monsters, the Chupacabra, you know, field work. I don't think anything will ever sort of replace that in terms of importance. And so for me, at least, when I went in 2004, this was with a team from the Sci-Fi Channel for a show called Proof Positive. I don't think there's any better way than to sort of be thrust right into the heart of it. And in the 8 or 9 days we were there, we interviewed ranchers, police officers, veterinarians, eyewitnesses, dozens of people who'd had some sort of involvement in the Chupacabra mystery, and it really sort of opened my eyes to the idea that, well, not the idea, but, you know, the reality of it to me was and still is that there's a genuine unknown creature known as the Chupacabra on Puerto Rico. The big question still is, years later, you know, what is it?
Yeah, I guess that is the big question. What is this thing? Is it actually something natural, or is there a possibility that it could be alien?
Well, you know, I mean, there's several different theories that I've heard every time I've been to Puerto Rico, you know, coming from the locals and the witnesses, and it typically falls into several camps. You get these people who think that it's some form of unknown animal, you know, just an unknown animal that science hasn't found or classified yet. Then you have, as you said, the alien theory. People have drawn a parallel with the fact that, admittedly, there are a lot of UFO sightings in Puerto Rico, and particularly around the huge El Yunque rainforest, which dominates much of Puerto Rico, and where there have also been a lot of Chupacabra encounters. Then there's sort of the conspiracy-tinged theory that the Chupacabras are some sort of weird genetic experiment done by military agencies, gene splicing and that kind of thing. And then you have the fourth theory, the idea that the creature is something like literally supernatural or paranormal, rather than a flesh and blood animal. And, you know, regardless of which one of these theories is correct, and it could even be another one, the important thing is I've heard these stories every time I've been to Puerto Rico, and you know, so it's clearly permeated, if you like, throughout the entirety of Puerto Rican society and culture. And as far as the physical description of it's concerned, as I said, the American one, typically these hairless dogs. But in Puerto Rico, it's a two-legged creature, a body kind of about the size and build of a chimpanzee, but without the hair. Some witnesses talk about this row of sort of vicious-looking spikes running down its head and the back of its neck. And bizarrely, some of the witnesses have even claimed that it had sort of bat-like membranous wings, that kind of thing. So, we're talking about something very different to the American one, and something more like, some witnesses have described it as looking not unlike a giant bat or something like that.
I have read reports, and I not necessarily those just out of Puerto Rico, but there seem to be some flaps down in Chile and down in South America as well. These things, people would see these things jumping on the tops of houses and scurrying about, and just literally that hard to catch. Has there ever been anything, any type of evidence of these things?
Well, unfortunately, it's like a lot of these cryptids, the evidence that we have is not so much sort of physical evidence, it's sort of the evidence that the creature's left behind, kind of like Bigfoot, with the footprints or tree knocks and, or chatter in the woods that's recorded on audio equipment. It's kind of similar with the Chupacabra. I'll give you a few examples. The first time I went there, we visited the ranch of a farmer named Nael, and he showed us how he had about 20 cages in his backyard. He bred chickens, and he showed us how these cages had all been sort of opened, some of them forced opened by something pretty strong, and had killed all the chickens inside. Bizarrely, they were all killed silently. There was no noise from any of them, and his farm, so to speak, was just like a little house, and the backyard was where he kept the cages. So he should have heard all the commotion and noise from the chickens, but there was nothing. So we were able to sort of examine these cages that he'd still got. There are other cases where, for example, we were shown tracks reportedly from the Chupacabra, which the problem was it was hard to distinguish what they were. One of the main reasons being that the prints we were shown on Puerto Rico, they get a lot of just heavy rain suddenly out of the blue. And so some of these tracks have been distorted by, the water coming down and then the mud, and they get lengthened and the width changes because of the water and so on. So in that sense, it's difficult to sort of prove anything. But what really, in terms of evidence, what kind of convinced me, and I think this is something that, we always come back to, was the credibility of the witnesses. I mean, some of the people we interviewed, and when I say interviewed, I mean across sort of the 10, 12 years, were veterinarians who had autopsied animals allegedly attacked by the Chupacabra, and they found puncture wounds on the neck, and then a third puncture wound on the sternum. That was sort of something typical but atypical of, regular animals. Then there were the people who'd actually taken photographs and prepared documents on behalf of the Civil Defense Unit on Puerto Rico. I didn't realize till I went out there on the second occasion in 2005 that particularly in the 1990s, Puerto Rico Civil Defense Unit actually had a number of people who pretty much on a full-time basis for a while went out to sites of alleged attacks by the Chupacabra, photographed the areas, interviewed the witnesses, took pictures of the dead animals, the victims, and prepared official reports. When I went there in 2005, I was fortunate enough to meet, this was actually with a Canadian TV company when I went the second time, and we met one of the retired civil defense people, and he actually brought out for us one of these files which he'd been allowed to keep when he retired, because he primarily put the file together, and it was about 2 inches thick, and it was kind of like a real X file, if you like. It was the official or an official Civil Defense Unit file with drawings, paintings that the witnesses had done, photographs of animal corpses lying in the fields, and etc. So, in other words, we don't have that smoking gun evidence, but we have like a lot of circumstantial evidence, as we do in things, like Bigfoot or Nessie or whatever.
Huh. Do you know of any cases where humans have been attacked by these?
Yeah, I often get asked that question, and it's an interesting question because, again, kind of like with the theories on what the Chupacabra is, every time I've been to Puerto Rico, I've heard stories of human attacks. Now, the big difference between the human attack stories and the animal attack stories is that we've got a lot of evidence, like I said, civil defense documents, photographs, witness testimony. When it comes to the reports of human attacks, all the stories I've got are second-hand or friend of a friend stories. I've never got personally to, a first-person situation where they've said it was my brother or my boss or whatever who was attacked and killed by one of these creatures. Now, you could make the case that the human accounts are friend of a friend tales based on, exaggerations of or distortions of, the attacks on animals. But on the other hand, if there is a cover-up of Chupacabra activity on Puerto Rico, and a lot of people think there has been, arguably attacks on people would be the one thing more than anything else that the authorities would want to clamp down on, and that you would find pretty much nothing on, because it would make sense that from a, ensuring there's no hysteria, etc., etc., those would be the cases rather than the animal attacks that, like I said, the government would clamp down on. So, all I can sort of say is be honest with you and say that, yes, I heard stories, but I was never able to really get nail anything down definitive on the human angle.
Now, the reports that come out of other parts of Latin America, are they fairly similar to the reports in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, they are. I mean, the one thing that really sort of typifies the nature of the animals in Puerto Rico and also in South America is not just the nature of the attacks with these puncture wounds and mutilations, etc., but the agility of these creatures. They're not sort of large, lumbering things like Bigfoot or the Yeti or anything like that. They're sort of, when I made that analogy with like chimpanzees, they're kind of like that. They're sort of super fast, where some witnesses have said that they have seen them running along at running at like a slower pace on two limbs, but then sort of bounding along on four limbs like a chimpanzee will do. It'll, when it's really charging fast, attacking another animal or whatever, they tend to use all four limbs. And so that's one of the things that typifies a lot of the Chupacabra reports is the speed of the animal, and the fact that, like a lot of other animals, they predominantly hunt at night. And as I said, these odd puncture wounds, very often puncture wounds where that's the only, evidence of the attack. It's not like the animal's been torn apart or dragged away as food. It's just whatever's attacked them has killed it with these puncture wounds, and that's it. And that's sort of given rise to some of these theories that could it be the blood that the Chupacabra has gone after. It's an interesting theory, and again, I heard this several times in Puerto Rico about animals with blood drain, but the problem was that, the average farmer on Puerto Rico just doesn't have the money to hire a veterinarian to come out and perform all the necessary tests. Unfortunately, a lot of people on Puerto Rico are quite poor, so they're just their main aim is putting dinner on the tables, for the family, not worrying about or, informing some cryptozoologist about that person's Chupacabra attack. So in other words, the evidence very often, and like the blood-sucking angle and things like this, becomes under-investigated because nobody really can be bothered to undertake them or hire somebody to do it. And again, it's not through any reason other than the fact that the person just doesn't have the funds, in these little villages or towns. They're just not able to, to hire people to do it. So the bodies start to rot, they throw them out. That's basically what it comes down to. So.
Now, in the United States, I know several years ago, your friend John Downs came into the United States to look at these blue dogs, or what he called them, blue dogs, which were,
Yeah.
I think they're mostly a hybrid of coyotes and Mexican wolves or whatever they
Yeah.
are. But do they actually kill like these chupacabras in Latin America, or is it something entirely different?
Well, the South American one actually sounds more like the Puerto Rican one. But
Okay.
yeah, but this is where it gets confusing, because the American one that you're talking about, when John came over and he hung out with Ken Gerhard for a few days down in San Antonio where Ken lives, and there's no doubt that Ken's done more research than anybody on the the American / Texas Chupacabra. And I interviewed Ken extensively for the book, and Ken actually opened my eyes to some really intriguing stuff. And I mean, the big difference between the Puerto Rican Chupacabra and the American one and Bigfoot is that we actually have the bodies of the American one, and they've been hit by vehicles, they've been shot by ranchers, and we know from DNA that, as you said, they're either coyotes or they're coyote crosses with wolves and sometimes with dogs. But the interesting thing is that why they actually are an anomaly are some of the physical issues that are going on with them. For example, the skeptics have said, well, they're just coyotes with mange. But if you look at your average coyote or animal with mange, which is a condition caused by a mite, where it causes intense irritation, hair falls out in clumps, they scratch themselves to the point where they dig so deep because they're itching so badly that infection sets in, they get sick and very often die. And because their hair's in clumps, they look really sickly. But these Texas Chupacabra, they're almost uniformly hairless, completely hairless, almost totally. On top of that, they have a significant overbite in many cases, and which is not normal. The jaws should be uniform. In some of the cases, they have these weird pouches on their hind limbs, which no one has really explained properly what they are. Some researchers have suggested they're the equivalent of calluses or something like that, but that doesn't really answer the question. If you Google Texas Chupacabra plus calluses and things like that, or lumps on the hindquarters, you'll see some photographs. And then there's also the fact that the front limbs of these animals seem to be developing at a shorter length, so it gives them this weird kangaroo-like hopping movement. So Ken has suggested that what we might be looking at is like a population of certainly the sort of the south and southwest portions of the US that are being affected and that are mutating. And what Ken's found out, particularly in Texas, is that where a lot of the clusters of these animals have been seen is in the vicinity of coal-burning plants. Now, a lot of these coal-burning plants give off what's called sulfur dioxide, which is a mutagen. Now, a mutagen, if it gets into the bloodstream of like a pregnant woman or an animal, it can cause disastrous mutations. Probably the worst is like mercury. If somebody ingests mercury and they're pregnant, it can cause terrible deformities. But sometimes mutagens can actually work in the favor of the animal in an odd way. For example, there's a famous story you can find on the internet of how in a Minnesota pond in 1995, frogs were being found with all sorts of weird mutations, like extra limbs, even extra eyes, but which were fully functioning. And this was put down to mutagens. So Ken has suspected that, or still suspects that, what we might be seeing is some sort of spontaneous mutation creating these or mutating these animals from their normal coyote state into something that has led them to be called the Texas Chupacabra.
So he believes there are actual breeding populations that, didn't become sterile through the hybridization?
No, they're actually not sterile. We know this because there are a number of photographs now where you can see the pups in the pictures as well, and they're completely hairless, and there's also some weird psychological angles going on with them as well. Most regular coyotes, most people never see them, even if they live, fairly close to resident populations, because they come out to hunt at night. One of the reasons why so many of these animals have been killed in Texas or hit by cars or, shot by ranchers is because they actually come out and hunt during the day. They're very prolific during the day, which isn't normal. And I've actually got one sort of very weird and creepy story where, but again, it suggests like the mindset of these creatures is also changing. It came from a rancher, sort of typical Texas rancher, big guy, truck gun, and his farm just between San Antonio and Austin had been attacked on a number of occasions, and he lost some animals, and he, decided enough's enough. And because he'd seen this animal a number of times during the day, he went out looking for it, and sure enough, he saw it in one of the fields. He was actually just sort of ambling across quite slowly, and it stopped and stared at him at a distance from, I think it's about 150 feet, maybe, something like that. He got out of his truck and was about to get it in his sights, and then he got this sensation that we all get from time to time, that somebody's watching you, and you flip round like you're in the queue at the local store and somebody is watching you, We all get that. And he looked round to his left and saw another one of these things to his left, about roughly the same distance, maybe a little bit less, and then to his right, another. And they started moving in, and he got a sense that they were sort of like triangulating him. And as I said, there was a reason why I mentioned you sort of typical big, macho Texas rancher. He raced back for his truck and locked the doors and drove off. And he told me he got like a really eerie feeling that they were sort of, sizing him up and moving around him, like a triangulating fashion. So if that's true, and, I have no reason to disbelieve the guy, it suggests some sort of, as I said, like a psychological change in the mindset, not just, the physical issues as well.
So, do they feed like normal predators, or do they drink blood as well?
Well, this is where it gets interesting, because initially there were stories circulating that these things, which people didn't really know what they were at first. There's stuff on the internet from like 2004 when people were saying they're like giant mutated rats, which is what they look like. But when the attacks first began, there were rumors of the animals supposedly draining or sucking the blood of the farm animals they attacked. Now, there's no doubt they attacked farm animals, killed them, in some cases, dragged them away and ate them, and presumably, fed the young with them as well. Now, when I've looked into this, I have never actually come across a case which demonstrates that any of these animals literally drink blood as a form of food, like, for example, or in the fashion, I should say, like something like a vampire bat, which actually doesn't suck blood. It actually laps the blood up, but, with its incisors, its teeth, which create an anticoagulant, which prevents the blood from clotting. If these animals are changing to that amount, it would be almost impossible. Our organs aren't gauged to live on blood. But I actually have spoken to a couple of people who said that when their animals were attacked, they did see these Texas Chupacabra basically sort of lapping the blood, that was spilled in the attack. Instead of just eating the meat, tearing it, or dragging the animal away, they stood there sort of lapping the blood where it had flowed out, which is kind of unusual. But it's things like this, the attacks on the farm animals, the rumors of, the blood draining, etc., that eventually and probably inevitably led people to call these things, the Texas Chupacabra. But they're clearly very different from the original Chupacabra. But like I said earlier, that term's become so iconic that anybody sees anything weird, it's like, oh, it's got to be the Chupacabra,
Now, these are Chupacabras in Latin America, and in particular the ones in Puerto Rico. Are they bipedal for the most part?
Are they what, sorry?
Bipedal?
Well, the Latin American ones, South American ones, they are. Puerto Rico. Predominantly in the US, they are four limbs,
Right,
obviously being
right.
coyotes. However, in saying that, there are some reports of these creatures, the Texas ones, actually standing up on their hind legs and balancing, and even having sort of a weird, almost like a stumbling ability to briefly run on their hind legs, which is very weird. Now, there's actually a photograph you can find online, taken by a guy I interviewed personally. There's a guy named Ryan Craighead, and this was a case that I investigated in Oklahoma in 2010. And Ryan, at the time, was about 17. He was at the local school in a little town in Oklahoma called Tecumseh. But if you Google Ryan Craighead plus Chupacabra, you'll see the picture that he took of this animal. And in the picture, it looks like one of these classic hairless coyotes / Chupacabras, but its front limbs are extremely small, and it actually is kind of bounding along on its hind legs. You can see it sort of balancing. And, that's... I have no real way how to explain that other than to say, although I don't have a large amount, I do have sort of 6, 7, 8 maybe reports of people saying they saw these hairless coyotes rise up onto their hind legs as if almost trying to intimidate the person or something like that.
Wow.
Well,
that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know if you're aware of it, but we've been, myself, Butch Witkowski, and Sean, we've been investigating these Dogman reports coming out of Pennsylvania lately. And it's been it was like a flap we got there for a while. They've kind of edged off, but we've been investigating them. What's your take on that anyway?
Well, the Dogman thing's interesting because one of the first things that occurred to me when people started telling me about seeing these Texas Chupacabras on the hind legs was that in one sense at least, they do sort of parallel the Dogman reports in the sense you're talking about a bipedal animal with a dog-like muzzle and face, but standing up to a degree at least like a person. Now, the big difference, of course, these hairless coyotes, they look weird, but they're no bigger than the average Chupacabra. Excuse me, they're no bigger than the average coyote. So in other words, that is the big difference in the sense that, people see these dogmen, they're looking at something 5 to 6 feet tall, kind of like a Bigfoot type creature, but with the face of a dog-like animal, sort of something along those lines. So I think we have to be dealing with two different things, but admittedly, it is intriguing and puzzling that people are seeing more of these dogmen, and we're also getting reports allegedly of these things, these creatures standing on the hind legs as well. So whether there's a connection or not, I don't know. But what I would say about the Dogman reports, like for example, Linda Godfrey, she's collected an incredible number of reports, and all I can say is that to me, it seems to be a real phenomenon. Now, the only way, I know that if you look at Linda's research, she sort of looked at the idea of a flesh and blood animal. She looked at the idea of a paranormal animal, and I don't think, we can sort of say for sure what they really are. But what I would say is that, a lot of people don't realize this, but the Thylacine, this presumed marsupial that lived on New Guinea and Australia in the past, well, a lot of rumors that the Thylacine or the Tasmanian tiger, as it's also known, could possibly still exist. A lot of people don't know that the Tasmanian tiger, the Thylacine, could actually briefly rise itself on its hind legs and run along in sort of a weird fashion on 2 limbs. You can actually find that at the Australian government's official website. It tells you the whole story about how they can stand up and balance on their tail, kind of like a kangaroo, which is also a marsupial like the Thylacine. So as incredible as it sounds, I do sometimes wonder if there could be some sort of, it's really a stretch, but what about the idea of a bipedal canine in the US that has the ability to, like a bear, move predominantly on 4 limbs, but if it wants to, it can stand up and rise up onto its hind limbs as well. I'd stress there's nothing in sort of the historical record to suggest that's the case. But, it's hard to, when you've got really credible witnesses, and there have been a lot of credible witnesses to Dogman reports, when you have those, it's difficult to dismiss them, even though they sound controversial. And I know why to a lot of people they sound controversial, because they create imagery of like werewolves, and then that sort of provokes, images of shape-shifting and full moons and silver bullets and the whole thing, But I don't think we necessarily have to bring all that into it. It's just that sort of our pop culture and folklore has brought that into it. But, the idea of an unknown creature in the U.S. that sort of broadly fits that bill, but which could potentially, walk on four limbs and two limbs, perhaps highly intelligent and very adept at hiding itself, that would be sort of a creepy thing to consider,
Yeah, well, we're open-minded at this point because we have no idea what we're dealing with.
Not a clue.
No, and I tell you, the reports we have gotten are pretty good reports. I mean, the witnesses have been very credible, and they saw something. They don't know what it was, but their descriptions are, and most of the descriptions are pretty close. And I don't know. It's something that I really never considered the Dogman or the bipedal canine a whole lot.
Yeah.
Even when I used to talk to Linda about it a lot, but until we started getting these reports recently, you got to start wondering what's going on around here.
Yeah.
We got a lot of Bigfoot reports up in Pennsylvania, but God, these Dogman reports, even though there has been a history of it, the fact that we're getting this many at one time is kind of unusual.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, it's like I said, it's controversial because of how they look. People say we look like a werewolf, and then, but half the people are going to just roll their eyes at the very mention of the term werewolves. But I mean, there really isn't sort of a better, more sort of good way to describe them. But I mean, the interesting for all the reports I've got of something along the lines of Dogman type reports, I've never ever got a single case. I don't think Linda has more than even like one or two where somebody claimed, it actually sort of shape-shifted, or somebody said, oh, I'm a Dogman, and I changed it a full moon. I've never ever got anything like that. It's people who just said, well, that looks like its normal state, and I think that's an important thing to remember. People aren't talking about people mutating into Dogmen when the moon's full or whatever. It's whatever they are, it seems that's their natural appearance.
Well, you've written a couple other books recently. The one titled Men in Black, Personal Stories and Eerie Adventures. And another one that really intrigued me was this Bloodline of the Gods, Unravel the Mystery of the Human Blood Type to Reveal the Aliens Among Us. Now, I didn't know what I was getting into when I started reading this thing. But this claim to that negative RH factor may be connected to alien blood types is kind of unusual. Can you kind of give a description or a synopsis of this whole thing?
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, there are four primary blood groups, as far as the human race is concerned. They're A, B, AB, and O. And the vast majority of the human population has essentially what's called positive blood, RH positive. RH comes from the rhesus monkey, a creature which, in DNA-wise, we're extremely compatible with. It's sort of like 93-94% DNA identical. And that's why, so many experiments into human drugs are actually undertaken on rhesus monkeys, because they are so close to us. Now, although somewhere in the region of like 90-91% of the population is RH positive, a small percentage is what's called RH negative. Now, what that means is that roughly, well, the figures are sort of about 10 to 12 percent in America. I'll give you the figures. In the US, for Caucasians, the figures are roughly 10 to 12% RH negative. For African Americans, it's sort of 8 to 9, and for Asian Americans, it's about 1 to 2%. So it's a very small percentage of the population is Rh negative. But what it basically means is that their blood lacks a particular antigen or a protein, which makes them very different in many ways to everybody else. One of the most amazing but also disturbing differences is that if you have a man and a woman, the woman gets pregnant, let's say hypothetically the man is Rh negative and the woman's blood is Rh positive. Well, when the baby, the fetus starts to grow, if, by chance or if a procedure has to be implemented, like, for example, what's called amniocentesis, where a needle has to be inserted to check the fetus is okay. If some of the fathers, if the fetus is Rh negative and some of that blood during a procedure gets into the mother's bloodstream and she's Rh positive, her body literally tries to kill the unborn baby. That's why any woman who becomes pregnant and, if one of the parties is Rh negative, one's Rh positive, they have to be put on medication to prevent the mother's nervous system essentially trying to kill the baby. And it does that by trying to create like anemia is one of the main characteristics in the developing fetus's body, which can lead to death. So for all intents and purposes, the mother's body perceives the growing fetus as, no pun intended, as alien and has to be gotten rid of. And as I said, to the point where they literally have to have drugs to combat this, and they work very well. It's just a matter of making sure that it happens, to ensure that the baby doesn't die or it doesn't fall ill or anything like that. But what's interesting is this particular issue that has sort of gone under the radar for so long in ufology, where a significant number of people, like, for example, alien abductees, contactees, people who feel drawn to the UFO subject or have had profound UFO encounters, are Rh negative. And on top of that, where, as I said, not necessarily even have had an encounter, but they just feel, like a tug from the subject, something pulling them towards it, and they just don't know why that's happening. And I've found this time and time again with reports of people who are Rh negative having these experiences. And, you can actually find cases from the very earliest years that suggest a connection between abductions and the Rh negative factor. And, of course, the big question is how or why. And the prevailing theory within UFO research is the idea that possibly in the distant past, extraterrestrials could have sort of modified or upgraded or just radically altered one aspect of the human race for whatever purposes we don't know, but it created an offshoot that to some degree, had like an extraterrestrial bloodline at its origin, and then thousands of years later, what we're seeing is, the last remnants, if you like, of this offshoot, demonstrating why they're so different. And I mean, there's no real reason, if the theory of evolution is correct, there's no real reason why we shouldn't all be Rh positive.
Right.
But the fact is, there's no real, although doctors, medical professionals understand the difference between Rh positive and Rh negative, and they understand how it can sometimes cause health hazards with pregnancy. There's no real solid consensus as to why that's the case. And I mean, to give you an example of some of the people in ufology who are sort of drawn to this new Rh negative, I mentioned about the idea that this goes back to possibly ancient astronaut scenarios when the earliest humans may have been genetically altered. Well, it turns out some of the major figures who've written books on ancient astronaut phenomena are Rh negative. Arguably the world's most famous, for example, Eric von Daniken is Rh negative. Brad Steiger, who's written extensively on ancient mysteries and ancient astronauts, Brad's Rh negative. you have a number of other researchers and authors as well over the years who looked into the whole issue, like Robert Anton Wilson. He was very interested in the ancient astronaut scenario. He was Rh negative. And the list goes on. And one of the theories is the reason why so many people who are Rh negative feel drawn to the UFO subject could be that, there might be some sort of latent thing in our DNA. We all inherit something from our parents, whether eye color, hair color, shape of your nose, whatever. There's an interesting but controversial theory that we can actually inherit fragments of memories as well. And that might explain, kind of like the idea when you have a dream and you wake up and it starts to fade away and you can't remember it all properly, but you vaguely remember it. It's kind of like that, the idea that the Rh negatives may retain some fragmentary memory of their, distant allegiance, if you like, if that's the right term, to this sort of extraterrestrial bloodline.
Well, I tell you, when I started reading the book, it fascinated me. So I started going on the internet and reading a little bit about this, and I contacted 3 different people who I had worked with who claimed they had been abducted at one period of time or another. And all 3 instances, it was just not the one person in the family, but other persons in the family as well. And I knew of one of them the information that they did have, everybody in the family had negative Rh negative blood. I went and checked the other 2, and it's the same with them too. They were all Rh negative.
Well,
yeah.
That doesn't surprise me because, it even surprised me. When the book first came out, the number of people who, you get, it's like your show, you get feedback. But when the book came out, I got a lot of messages like on Facebook and Twitter and etc. saying that, they'd read the book and, oh, by the way, I'm Rh negative, and another one, oh, by the way, I'm Rh negative. And they'd all had these experiences. And within the first week or so, I probably had 40 or 50 replies, as I said, that first week alone, from people who'd had abduction encounters, things like this, and they didn't realize necessarily that there was a connection with the Rh blood, but they were Rh negative. So we're actually seeing this subject come sort of more, into focus now. People are beginning to realize more and more that there does seem to be some sort of, connection between this sort of ancient bloodline, if you like, and even right through to today's ufology.
Well, I tell you, I went and looked at some of the possible characteristics that they say these people have the Rh negative blood. Some of them have the either higher than average IQs, more sensitive vision and other senses, lower body temperature, higher blood pressure, psychic intuitive abilities, predominant blue, green, hazel eyes, red hair, sensitivity to heat and sunlight, cannot be cloned, and extravertebrae. Personally, I have Rh negative, and every one of those applies to me except 2. So that I'm thinking to myself now, that maybe there is something to this.
Yeah, like I said, there are a lot of people who never had any experiences except that they can remember at least, but they feel, eerily drawn to it. And the one issue you brought up, which is interesting, is the issue of having an extra vertebra. Now, every year, people who of any blood group are born with an extra vertebra. It's just a condition that sometimes happens. And, you probably wouldn't know unless you ever had back surgery and the doctor didn't bother to point it out because it doesn't really cause any issues as such. Right. However, there is a slightly higher percentage of people who are Rh negative who have this extra vertebra. Now, what's really interesting is that if we go back to 1961 and the famous Betty and Barney Hill abduction, the couple coming back from a vacation in Canada back home to New Hampshire. And as Betty and Barney were driving home, they saw this light in the sky, and it seemed not to be a light but some sort of vehicle. then they had this typical missing time thing, excuse me, being taken on board a craft and medical experiments and so on. That was followed by bad dreams, and so they finally had regressive hypnosis. Well, it turns out that Barney said that when he was on board the craft, that the aliens, or whatever they were, kept running their fingers up and down his spine, and he thought with hindsight they were counting his vertebra. And of course, back in 1961, when the Hills experience occurred, and certainly 62, 63, 64, when the hypnosis was going on, nobody other than Barney and Betty really were talking about a connection or some sort of odd connection between the experience and Barney's spine. But if you look at it with hindsight today and realizing, the RH negatives having more people, with a higher incidence of this extra vertebra, you have to wonder if they were checking out his vertebra as if they were trying to determine if he was RH negative,
Well, I've had back problems all my life, and when I went to the doctor to have my back checked, he told me I got an extra vertebra, and I've never even really thought about it until I read this thing. I think, now what in the hell is that all about? So
you know what it means. You know what it means? It means
you got me thinking.
It means you're one of them.
I may be.
All right, goodbye, Lon. No, I'm kidding.
That's interesting. Oh man, so where a lot of people, or a lot of things that have come up, you even have it in the book, where this is connected to the possible connected to the Book of Enoch and the fallen angels, the Watchmen, and such.
Yeah, well, I point out that a lot of this, we know certainly the situation today because we can interview the people around, but the one person who sort of more than any other put together this whole angle of genetic manipulation in the distant past was the late Zechariah Sitchin, and he felt that sort of an early type of human like Cro-Magnon may have been genetically altered by what had become known as the Anunnaki. They're sort of very, legendary figures, within ancient lore, but Sitchin perceived them as extraterrestrials, but highly advanced in fields of like genetics and gene splicing. And he felt that a lot of the ancient legends of the gods coming down and taking human wives and giants on the earth and the Nephilim and all that kind of thing was essentially tied in with genetic experiments between, visiting aliens and early primitive humans. And he suggested that it may have all been done to create like a slave race, a sort of robust slave race. And that what's interesting, that there are good indications that Cro-Magnon man may have been RH negative, which could have been, the entity that Sitchin was talking about. And what's interesting is that one of the areas where Cro-Magnon man proliferated in parts of Spain and France is where the Basque people, B-A-S-Q-U-E, the Basque people live today, and they have an extremely high percentage of RH negatives. As I said, it's sort of round about sort of 10% and lower in the US. In the Basque region of Spain, where the Basque people live, their percentage is like above 40%. So the fact that the Cro-Magnons were in that area as well does suggest a strong possibility that they were RH negative. So that
You there, Lon?
Yeah, did we lose Nick?
I think we lost Nick.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did. We lost Nick. Well, folks, we're almost out of time for the show tonight anyhow, so we're going to have to get a hold of Nick after the show. Sorry we dropped you there, Nick. It was a good show tonight. You guys lost me in the dust with the RH stuff, but you were excited about it. That's what matters. You were really excited.
That's a fascinating thing. I had heard about this, and of course I used to love reading the Sitchin's books, and the late Lloyd Pye and he was a protege of Sitchin, and we used to talk about a lot of this, and it was fascinating. But this RH negative factor is, it's just something else to think about, and I subscribe to some of the Book of Enoch and the Anunnaki and the Nephilim and all that, but it's almost to the point it's a lot of speculation, but you wonder why some stuff like that was never put into the Bible. The Book of Enoch was not put into the Bible, but a lot of books were not put in the Bible as well. And the reason you got to think about, well, why was that? Is it something so controversial that the that it wasn't even it wasn't considered to be put in the Bible? So I don't know. It's an interesting theory. The book is great. It's called Bloodline of the Gods: Unravel the Mystery of the Human Blood Type to Reveal the Aliens Among Us. I'm about halfway through it, but it's a great book.
Definitely pick it up, folks. Well, Lon, that's about all we got for tonight. Next week, we talk about Kennedy.
Yeah, we're going to do a special next week. We are going to be talking about the JFK Assassination Conspiracy, or was it basically? I mean, was it really a conspiracy, or did did was it a one man that caused the havoc, or was it a conspiracy by some other type of agency or cabal or whatever? So we're gonna do our homework this week, kind of brush up on it, and if people have questions or want to talk about it, we got the telephone number, and we've got the chat room. Maybe we can have a pretty decent conversation about this.
Most definitely. So, folks, we'll see you next week. You've been listening to Arcane Radio, Sean Forker, Lon Strickler, and tonight's guest, Nick Redfern. We'll catch you next week, folks. Thank you very much. Have a good night.